So thanks so much for joining for Impact State of Mind. I'm John Paul Parmigiani, CEO and co-founder of Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area. Impact Hub New York Metropolitan Area is a nonprofit supporting entrepreneurs and change makers through programs designed to help innovative ideas take off. So thanks so much for joining us today for this session, Global Markets, Manila, Philippines. We are honored to have with us Ces Randario, CEO and co-founder of Impact Hub Manila. I'm going to hand it over to my co-founder, Archana Shah, to lead the discussion.
Hi, everybody. Good night to Ces and good morning to everybody in New York. Ces, thank you so much on behalf of Impact Hub also for this late hour session with us. We wanted to kick it off with asking you just about the ecosystem for social entrepreneurship within the Manila metro area, if you will. You've been in this space for quite a while, and if you could give some context for our viewers, that'd be great.
All right, so hi guys. Thanks for inviting me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. And I guess to kick it off, well, the MSME, so the startup ecosystem basically belongs to the MSME community in the Philippines, right? And the MSME community comprises about 99% of the entire business community in the Philippines. So it's a massive, it's almost everything, right? And
can I stop you really quick? What can you, just for the viewers, MSME, can you define what that is, and especially in a Manila or Philippines context?
So MSME is basically the micro, small, and medium enterprises. And so the definition basically is broadly based on just revenue, right? So anything below a certain revenue is considered MSME. And then the micro obviously are the more informally settled kind of businesses. And then the SMEs are more or less where the startups kind of fall, right? So that kind of ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, it started very, I think if my memory serves me correct, it hasn't been even 15 years since this community started, right? It's a very nascent industry here. We have a very, very young group of founders who basically emerged in the last 10 years, and it's grown since then. We have a few ones who had exits, who've had who've raised money, but to say that it's big, it's not. It's increasing, but I can't say that it's okay. It's moving there, I would say.
So, but it still is 99%, you're saying, of the startup ecosystem or the economy?
So the 99% is the percentage of the micro, small, medium enterprise of the entire business community.
Of the business community, right.
So there's like 1%.
Yeah.
So the 1% are really the conglomerates, if you will, right? The other.
And what you're saying is that the SMEs to generally not very many grow to the larger businesses.
It's very rare, right?
And is it, you think, in your point of view, is it because it's such a young community still and there aren't the support systems in place, or is it just a function of that's how it works over there?
Well, a lot of it is infrastructure, right? And infrastructure lends to, just also not just Wi-Fi, not just internet, not just the basic utilities, but we're talking about setting up a company is terribly hard here in the Philippines. It takes you months just to register. It's even harder to close down a business. So when you have those things going against you, it's not necessarily an easy ride for an entrepreneur, right?
So in terms of just your role or the Impact Hub's role in this space, how do you support the ecosystem? In what way in this what seemingly difficult market for startups?
So there's definitely a gap where there are a lot of brilliant ideas and there are a lot of energy from entrepreneurs and from aspiring entrepreneurs. But the problem is that there's a funding gap, right? And there's a capacity building kind of just middle that's missing. So you can have a great idea, but unlike probably in the more advanced ecosystems in the world where there is seed funding, there is prototype funding. In the Philippines, you would be lucky to find somebody who would want to support you pre-launch, pre anything, right? So, and bootstrapping in the Philippines is not necessarily easy because a lot of the culture here is very different. We're not raised to become entrepreneurs. We're raised to be, I think the mindset is always go to employment, get work, So, and the culture of the Filipino person is really different because we're raised to take care of our families. We're raised to stay home, and we're raised to be very, you work and then you get a job and then you get married. That's more of like the pathway. And a lot of times, a lot of the entrepreneurs that we support here are, they still have day jobs, and then a lot of them start out like that. They have day jobs, and then when the business starts picking up, then that's when they kind of go full time. So the way that we've been helping is all of our programs have been catered to early stage or seed funding, grant support. We're the only incubator in the Philippines that does not take shares from the program, from the monies that we provide through grants, through our community. And I think that's really been where we've been supportive. And also, we're one of the only ones that are, well, there's a lot of that are emerged since we opened, but it's more of, and also obviously the social, enterprise sector is also very different, right? So you talk about startups in general, it's already nascent, but can you imagine the social enterprise kind of community, right? So that one is really where we're focusing on. So in terms of supporting them, there's our programs, connecting them to people, and even being able to connect them globally, right? I mean, that's always been the strength of Impact Hub.
I want to touch on global in a little bit, but I also want to address the elephant in the room that we are all part of, this great pandemic that we are globally part of. How is that further, it seems like probably further challenge the social innovation community that already you're saying is quite frail there?
I mean, I think what COVID really did is that, it exposed the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses of systems, right? Whether this is government, whether this is, companies and corporations that are supposed to be anchored well, right? So it definitely has been a blow. I just received a report yesterday actually, that 52% of the MSME population in the Philippines have closed down. That's half. That's more than half that have been hit by the pandemic, right? And then about 12% have had to reduce operations, and then 35 are the ones that are still going. And I'm not going to be surprised if the 12% also dips, right? So it's been really difficult, especially because a big part of our community really relies on just the interconnectedness of everybody, right? One entrepreneur supporting the other. It's like an ecosystem of its sort. So if one shuts down, very likely everybody else will kind of suffer with it. So yeah, it's been tough, but I think if anything, right, you see who is going to survive just by the virtue of how they come out from this and how you see them doing. People have pivoted. People have, figured out a way to stay kind of solvent and, afloat somehow. But yeah.
Wow, and that sounds really rough. When you talk about pivoting, and again, we'll stay in the local context for now, what can you share some interesting case studies that are part of your ecosystem or that you've observed?
Well, that's the thing, right? So for a country like the Philippines, a lot of so I'll speak on the focus of the social enterprise. A lot of our social enterprises, most of the social enterprises here are actually, they're more lifestyle entrepreneurs, right? So these are your entrepreneurs that are upscaling fabric and making bags and really selling really cool stuff, and or using indigenous fabrics, for example, right, for their communities. And it's really, those are the ones that have really, really become successful, if you ask me, if in terms of social enterprise development. So those ones have pivoted to making masks. Those have pivoted to making, PPEs, and those have pivoted into creating other things that are necessary for this during this time, right? Not to say that I was telling them, at some point you're going to hit a ceiling with how many people are making masks and PPE, because right now it's needed, but and they're surviving, yeah, but but that's the pivot. There's been the tourism sector here in the Philippines is badly hit, as of everywhere in the world. But those are the ones that have no pivoting. Like, they're completely shifted their focus into doing other things. Like, people have started doing trainings, and people have had to do other things completely off tangent from what they're doing, right? Because there's really no way to pivot from a travel business. So there's been some really, I guess, some people have thrived. Like, we just had one of our speakers from tonight's regional event is Kumu. So they're social, they're like their social app, messaging app for the Philippines, and they do live streaming. And because everybody's home, everybody's using them. So some have thrived, some have obviously experienced the blow, but there's stories here and there. But the goal is to kind of just make sure that everybody stays alive somehow.
Yes. So the threshold has become survival in a way.
Yeah.
It's really interesting what you're talking about with respect to the 52%. That caught my attention in a big way because it's such a significant part of the economy. Do you think that this pandemic, which has exposed vulnerabilities, I think, you're seeing that in Manila, we're seeing that over here in the US, and I think many parts of the globe are discussing this. Do you think that's going to entice more innovation in the social sector?
Well, we have no choice except to innovate and to kind of, find a path forward, right? I mean, my theory is that everybody will kind of figure out a path leading back to their why, whatever that is, right? And then hopefully these are the people who've had social innovation at the core of their work, right? And rightly so, it will definitely affect everybody else around them, because now they realize that, anything can happen, and I probably shouldn't be eating wild meat, and I probably should be eating more, whatever. So it's going to have an effect that we probably will not realize until we see things, front center. And I'm imagining that people are just going to be more aware of the little things now, because now anything can happen. I mean, who would have thought that the world would suffer, right? So the call, I think, now is to the people who have had, the passion for social innovation, to try to see how they can connect the dots, right? Because everybody's going to be recycling. Everybody's gonna, imagine the PPE suits and all of these plastic waste and all of the medical waste that's gonna go into the world because of the situation. I mean, someone's gonna innovate on that, right? Someone's bound to innovate on that.
So silver lining, there's probably a lot of innovation opportunities that can come out of this. I also think, and just with my 2 cents in, from our perspective over here, we're starting to see the fallacies. I don't want to say the fallacies, actually, the weaknesses of structures that are government only, and the role that the private sector can play in being innovative and creative around solutions to these structural weaknesses that we've seen play out. So it'll be really interesting to see that come through, hopefully. One thing I did want to ask about that I said we'll put a pin in it a little while ago is global markets. You mentioned that one of the things is extending the ecosystem beyond locally, regionally, Asia, but also globally. Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of how or what opportunities you might see for, sort of a New York social innovator in fashion, for example, working with a local social innovator in your community? I'm just picking fashion, but it could be anything.
I mean, I think now, given the situation, right? I mean, I think we all have to understand that we're held back by the problems of travel and of just logistics, right? And so there has to be a way where experiences for global trade to, even that will have to pivot, even that will have to kind of change how we utilize the things that we have within our countries. I think, as much as I want to say that, okay, let's focus on how we can globally scale, I think now is a good time to understand what is intrinsic and what is unique in our own ecosystems, and then find a way to kind of just almost like match that with what's missing in other parts of the world, right? So for us, we have a lot of indigenous fabrics and all that, but in New York, there's a lot of some very advanced design professionals in New York who I'm pretty sure are looking to finding new ways of expressing their brilliance, and we have raw materials here in the Philippines that needs to kind of just be used and be repurposed and just be thought of and used differently, right? So I think that's a way. I think creativity wise also, I mean, the Philippines is a really, really musical country. I think we're one of the most creative people in the world, and the problem is that's been killed by this pandemic, right? And so the question is, how do we and it's happening now, everything is on YouTube, they're showing theater and all that, but the question is, how do we continue to bring that to a bigger audience? And the Philippines is about 100 million, right, in population. So how do we kind of match what's being offered there and what's available here, and vice versa? We'd love to see more exchanges, but then I guess also it needs to come, maybe it's not even just the things, maybe it's knowledge that needs to be transferred already. The innovation that you guys see there, we're still very much behind in a lot of aspects. So I think maybe knowledge transfer is even more critical now. And just doing these things, right? Exposing everybody to the realities on the ground and being able to see what else could be done, what has been happening across the world, what could be brought over, because we do, obviously we can't travel, we can't be shipping things around. So I think first thing is, how do we share knowledge, and how do we do capacity building through these, series of things that we do.
It's really interesting because it's simple enough, right? It sounds like capacity building, knowledge sharing, technical support for an economy or a market that seems to be ripe for growth, right? If so much of your market is SMEs and micro, fine, let's leave the micro up for 30 seconds, but if it SMEs that just need funding or technical assistance to get to the next stage, that seems simple enough. I don't mean to minimize what it is, but it seems simple enough to be able to share best practices, or for technical experts on one side to be able to transfer that knowledge into a market context.
I mean, if you think about it, collaboration needs to happen in the most, crazy ways. Like, there has to be a way where I'm pretty sure there's gaps to be filled that we are lacking in that, and because of the situation, I'm sure there's a lot of loose ends also that needs to be tied, and maybe that's where we start, right? Connecting the dots between people who are looking to doing the same things or passionate about building an ecosystem, and it fits right there, right? I think that's the whole purpose of this network that we belong to. It's like I think exchange happens in the most subtle of ways, and we might not even realize it, right? So the problem is, how do you spot it when it's there, or how do you continuously provide opportunities for these things to happen? I think placemaking is a value that we provide, and so hopefully that helps us get through the door.
No, absolutely, and I think what's also important to a lot of what you're saying is the cultural context. You can't just take one thing and put it in another market, but the cultural context of it, and so it translates appropriately to another market. But it's really inspiring to hear because it feels like that's something that we have plenty of technical know-how and creativity around things like seed financing and innovative products for that. And how wonderful would it be if we could share those across the markets. I'm gonna invite attendees to ask questions if they want, but if not, you're stuck with me for now. And I'm curious about sort of the Asia context. I know you lead the APAC sort of region for the hub. And so I would love to understand how Philippines or Manila, the Manila ecosystem fits into the Asian context. I think people are familiar with like certain markets and then kind of, I don't want them to lump Philippines into sort of the Asia piece. I'd love for you to differentiate that a little bit for us in these last few minutes.
So, I mean, the Philippines, we're one of the bigger economies in terms of just population in Asia Pacific, right? Not counting obviously China and in India, but we're 100 million. And so we're a very good country for testing, for validation. If you were looking for a country that you just wanted to test out your product or your social and your enterprise for that matter, the Philippines is a good place. But it's not a country for scale, right? Unless you have a very particular model that is going to it's a B2C model, then it's pretty hard to kind of scale in the Philippines, right? So the unique thing about the Philippines is that we are largely English speakers, right? So a lot of the technology that's developed here in the Philippines actually translates to the world. So if you look at it, a lot of the things that we produce don't have to be, it's not nuanced in any particular kind of context. It's very much made for the West, or not just globally, right? So it's in English. A lot of the things that we produce are very kind of the culture. It's very Filipino still, but then for me, it already has a global feel, just because we've been colonized many times, and we've been absorbing these cultures from the very beginning, right? So that's where we sit, I guess. We're a country that a lot of people want to come to because labor is cheap. Unfortunately, utilities are bad because we're pretty expensive that way because of, well, hello, monopoly. But it's still a good country to kind of have a base in because, again, people are, labor is cheaper. Operations are relatively lower in terms of running a team, and it's just a nice, in my opinion, it's a good place to kind of start things because you have a automatic culture of family, because that's really the thing that drives the Philippines. So we're very different. I don't think that we're going to be the ones leading the technological, advancement of Asia Pacific, but I do believe that we're going to be the country to go to if you wanted to test out, if you wanted to start anything, if you wanted to just hang your hat and figure out what to do. I do think this is the place for that.
Sounds like it's a great gateway for someone who might want to look at the Asia region for their product or their organization or their innovation.
It is. I mean, obviously that's the role that Singapore kind of played because it is the big airport in Asia Pacific. But in terms of just the way that we're set up, the population is here. I think the Philippines has a lot to offer.
Excellent. Thank you. And I want to be cognizant of time, but we do have 5 minutes, so I'm going to take it. I want to ask you, as a leader in this space and someone who's been, a native to the country, what inspires you? I know right now things continue to be challenging, but what inspires you? What gives you hope in the work you're doing?
Well, I'm inspired by the fact that I've seen the worst of many cultures, but I've also seen how good people could get and how amazing governments and countries could become, right? We have certain models for that, and I think what gives me hope is that I refuse to believe that the Philippines will not get better. I refuse to believe that we're not gonna get it right somehow, right? might not be my generation, but I always say this. I mean, if I do end up, marrying anyone or like settling down, I'm gonna have children. Whoever I end up marrying, my children are gonna be Filipinos, whatever happens, right? And I have cousins and nieces and nephews who are still Filipinos. No matter what I do, we're gonna be Filipinos. And so, what would I tell myself in 50 years that I didn't even try to do anything? So I refuse to not be part of a solution, because I do recognize the problem that's here. And if I didn't do anything, I don't know how I would live with myself. So that, I don't know how that answers the question, but like that's always been the thing, right? We could do better. We have to be better.
Absolutely. And that's what you give to your community, right? When in tough times, it sounds like that's what you're trying to share with them, is to stay the course and look to the other side and get as creative as you can.
And just keep one foot, over the next, and just, one step at a time. It doesn't have to be a big, like I always like doing big things, but then, any step forward is a step forward, right? So.
Absolutely. Any last words, Sess, before I let you call it a night?
Well, I just hope that everybody who gets to see this, remembers that we're all just interconnected. And, we've been equalized by this great phenomenon known as COVID. So I hope that everybody stays in touch. And I hope everybody finds a way to support not just their own, but, the rest of the world, because this is the first time that the rest of the world understands exactly what everybody's going through. There's never going to be a moment in history, I don't think, that we can ever have, and I think that's unique to our generation. And I think we need to see that with hopefully a more silver lining look into it.
Absolutely. I completely agree. This is a common experience that we should all learn from, rather than try to tackle on our own, if you will.
Yeah,
so, Sess, thank you again for joining us today, and your generosity of thought. We will see you again soon. Bye.
Bye.